Okay, today is landscape painting, watercolor landscape painting. I'm doing a little bit of experimenting today, so I'm using a couple of colors in the sky that I really never use. So this first one is neutral tint. It's a slightly, I guess, slightly purplish or violet gray. And then the second color that I'm using is this sepia. Now these are colors that I bought when I first got started with watercolor just over a year ago. I never really used them, so the tubes are still sort of sitting there. So I decided to have a go with them, see what they're like, and I decided just to use them in the sky as a kind of underlayer and then put blue on top of that. And the blue that I'm using is a cerulean blue. Now both the neutral tint and the sepia were, I think, Winsor & Newton paints, and then everything else is Sennelier paints. This painting is the first in a series of painting, a sort of mini challenge for myself. What I want to do is produce art and video it and put that video up onto YouTube every day for the rest of this month, so September 2020. You know, there are some of these art challenges. In October, for example, they have that Inktober, I think it's called. It's more for people who are into, I guess, anime or manga or comic drawing, that type of thing. I don't know if there are people who do watercolor challenges or anything, but I'm going to set myself a little challenge anyway for the rest of this month. Okay, so some of the other colors that I've been using at the bottom of the page was Prussian blue. It's diluted quite a bit, so that's why it's not so dark. And what I'm doing at the moment is just messing around with the horizon, trying to get the horizon the shape that I wanted. And I'm adding in a little bit of sort of violet purple. In the sky, before I put any paint onto the sky, the paper was soaking wet. So then when I put the pigment onto the paper, it sort of spreads out and you get these soft edges. Whereas you can see at the bottom of the paper was dry and you're getting harder edges. There's nothing wrong with hard edges in the sky or soft edges on the land. It's just that in the sky, I wanted this particular painting to have softer clouds. Other things I'm doing at the moment, this sort of dry brush, it creates these lines that it's sort of implied detail. I'm not actually drawing or painting blades of grass, but just the dry brush suggests the idea that maybe there's grass growing sort of vertically here. Recently I was watching a video about colors that watercolorists should use or should never use. To be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical every time I see a YouTube video with a title like 5 colors you shouldn't use or 5 mistakes that you're making. It's a bit negative. I don't really like it, but I did end up watching this video. The power of clickbait, I suppose. But in the video, the artist was saying some colors that you should never use, and some of them I agree with. 2 in particular was white and black. The problem with black is it's so overpowering. If you put black onto a painting, your eye tends to be attracted immediately to that. You can use black, and there's lots of artists, especially more classical artists, who use black a lot. People like Rembrandt and Caravaggio and all those sort of guys. If you know what you're doing and you use it well, it can be very powerful. If you're doing a landscape and you want to create shadows an alternative to black would be dark blues. Being sort of a fan of Impressionism, it's sort of what I tend to go for. Impressionists didn't really use black in their paintings. They used blue or darker shades of particular color to create shadows. The other color that this YouTuber mentioned was white. And again, white watercolor paint isn't that useful. I know that if you're working in, say, oils or acrylics, you maybe use white. You maybe use white as a mixer to create different shades of colors. But in watercolor, you tend to use water rather than white. So for example, if you have a red and you want pink, you just use more water with your red paint. Some people, and I've used it myself, is using gouache, white gouache, particularly to create clouds in the sky. Gouache is a more opaque kind of, not quite watercolor, but water soluble paint. So you can use that, it can work. But very often, just to create these wider highlights, you just let the paper show through. And you can see that in the bottom end of the painting I'm doing. There's bits of grass where I wanted to create sort of highlights and things, so I just left the white showing through. Some other things I was doing was flicking paint onto the paper just to create this sort of texture in the foreground, so the bottom part of the picture. Creating that sort of texture and implied detail in the foreground but not in the background kind of helps to create a sense of depth in the painting. You can also, as I was doing, use your fingers to scratch the paper or to move the paint around. It doesn't always have to be the brush. I think definitely experiment with different things. I've seen people using things like salt or soapy water to create texture with watercolors as well. Okay, so this is the final painting. It's a scan of the final painting. The scan tends to bring out the colors more. So like I say, this is the first in a series, hopefully a daily series of videos for the rest of the month of September 2020. So if you'd like to subscribe, just click on the big red button below, and hopefully see you in the next video.